So I want to talk to you guys about Germany pulling Iran into its sphere of influence through commerce. There is a very interesting historical parallel with what is taking place today in regards to the relationship between the West and Iran. Today, Iran is in a state of great economic diminishment. Its economy is doing a terrible job. It's been quite devastated by the sanctions that have been imposed on Iran by the United States. And the Americans want Iran to be in a bad economic place because as long as Iran is poor, Iran is weak. And there are people in American political discourse who hope that through the bad economy, enough Iranians will be desperate enough to do a revolution and overthrow the government and allow the Americans to put in place a pro-American state. There is this situation where Iran remains poor, and as long as it is poor, it is exploitable and it is weak. Now let's go back to the late 19th century. Iran was extremely poor. Extremely poor. Its people were living in utter squalor, despair, economic despair. The British wanted Iran to remain this way. The British, the motherland of America, wanted Iran to remain in a state of dependency because as long as Iran was poor, Iran was controllable and exploitable. And this is really not that surprising given the fact that it was only in the early 1900s that Britain would begin its project to take oil from Iran. But there was a superpower in Europe, a growing, rising superpower in Europe, that wanted to do deep commercial projects with the Iranians. And this was Germany. Germany, in the 1870s, which is the decade that Germany actually became a country, did a treaty of friendship with the Iranians. And in the late 1800s, Germany began to do commercial dealings with the Persians. And both sides made millions of Reichsmarks together through these commercial dealings. The Persians, as a result, hated the British, and they also hated the Russians because Moscow also wanted Iran to remain in a state of dependency because it was controllable. So the Iranians, as a result, they hated the British and they hated the Russians, but they loved the Germans. And they were intellectuals in Iran who made rhetoric such as God had given the sword to the Germans. Allah has given power to the Germans to fight the Western enemies. And this love for Germany never really ended. It continued on, and it was manifested in the Second World War, when imams were declaring that Hitler was the 12th imam. So Iranian-German relations, they go back a long ways, going all the way back to the late 19th century. The British didn't really care about helping the economy of Iran. The British wanted to simply exploit Iran. The Russians wanted the same thing. Eventually, the Soviets and the British conquered Iran together in the 1940s. The Soviets took northern Iran, the British took southern Iran. But the Iranians remained pro-German. In one of my prior videos, I talked about the importance of Iran for Russian security. During the Second World War, the Russians could not have weapons transported into Soviet territories through the east, in Vladivostok, because the Japanese were in the way, and they could not get goods or weapons, really, transported through the Black Sea because Turkey was in the way, and Turkey was a neutral country that did not want to be involved in the conflict. So the Russians had no other choice but to have American weaponry transported into Soviet territory through the Persian corridor. The Russians needed the Persian corridor as a route by which to import American military technology, such as aircraft. The Americans would have military factories established within Iran, where they would build tens of thousands of aircraft for the Soviets. But there was a problem that the Americans had to face, and that was Iranian workers within these factories who were pro-German and tried to sabotage the factories. There were numerous cases of attempts of sabotage within these factories by pro-Nazi Iranians. And hundreds of Iranians had to be fired because they were trying to sabotage the factories. Now, why were they trying to sabotage the factories? Because they hated Western countries like America, like Britain, and they loved the Nazis. They loved the Germans. And a lot of this has roots in the late 19th century, when the Germans would begin a treaty of friendship with the Persians, and then would also commence commercial dealings with the Persians. And together they made money. The British didn't like this, but this is something that the Germans pursued. Now let's fast forward to our own times. We have sanctions imposed on Iran by the United States. The Americans pressure European countries to not do any sort of commercial dealings with the Iranians under the threat of sanctions. The Americans will actually threaten European countries with sanctions if they pursue commerce with Iran. The Americans want Iran to remain in a state of squalor and dependency because they want to control Iran. But in the midst of all of this, Germany still pursues the very same position that it had in the late 19th century. We will continue to do business with the Iranians. We want to do business with the Iranians. The Americans will pressure European countries to not do business with Iran because America is pro-Israel. America also has a very strong pro-Israel lobby within its political apparatus. The Europeans know this. The Germans know this. The Germans also know that there is a very strong pro-Israel lobby within their political apparatus, within Germany. And it will make sure that politicians will have very pro-Israel sentiments. And there is a growing phenomenon within Germany that because America controls German politics, Israel also has influence on Germany's politics. Because America is pro-Israel, because America has this pro-Israel lobby, that this pro-Israel lobby expands all the way to Germany. And there is even a quote that you can read from a known German politician by the name of Andreas Nick. He is with the Christian Democrats. And he said that this lobby wants to coerce Germany to simply do the bidding of Netanyahu. So there is a growing sentiment within Germany that Germany is not in control, that Germany has no self-autonomy, that Germany has no independence, and that Germany is dependent on America, and because America has this very strong pro-Israel lobby, that this pro-Israel lobby is also controlling Germany. So there's this growing animosity towards Israel. Germany supports the Iran deal. America says, no, you can't do that. Germany wants to do commercial dealings with the Iranians. The Americans say, no, you can't do that. America will threaten sanctions on Germany. Years ago, Germany wanted to build some natural gas plants within Iran. I believe it was liquid natural gas, and there was a lot of talk within the pro-Israel apparatus, within the pro-Israel lobby in Germany, about how this is bad and how Germany should not do any sort of business with Iran. So Germany wants to be independent. Germany wants to have self-autonomy. And if it wants to do business with Iran, it feels that it has that right. And why are the Americans telling us what to do? And the reason why America, see, and this is really what it comes down to, the sentiment within Germany is eventually going to escalate to the reason why the Americans are telling us what to do is because the Jews in America are controlling Washington and telling us what to do. Because we want to do business with Iran, the pro-Israel lobby in America says, no, that's not good. The pro-Israel lobby within Germany says, no, that's not good, Germany, you shouldn't do that. And they're trying to tell us what to do. It's these Israelis. It's Netanyahu. It's the pro-Israel lobby. They are trying to control us through the United States. And even Hitler himself made these sorts of observations, that America's government was controlled by the Jews. So this sentiment is growing. That's why you're seeing anti-Semitism growing so much. And every time Israel has a conflict with Hamas, the anti-Jewish feelings grow internationally. And I remember Norman Finkelstein, very famous critic of Israel. He said that the media that is most critical of Israel in the West is the German media. This is what he said. And this is a guy who hates the Israeli government. And he was applauding the German media. So Germany's rise against America is greatly rooted in the conflict over the Iran deal. It's greatly rooted in that conflict. America makes a deal with Iran, says, okay, you can do business with Iran. Germany says, great. Trump takes over. Trump takes office, says, no, you can't do that. Germany says, why? Because we said so. Well, it's these pro-Israel people that are trying to control us. So anti-Semitism grows. Hatred toward Israel grows. And Iran hates Israel. Germany wants to continue doing business with Iran. And this perceived animosity from Western countries like Great Britain, like the United States, it's only going to bring Germany and Iran closer together. And that pro-German sentiment in Iran is only going to grow. We can see it right in history. Right in history. And what happened eventually? What happened in the First World War? The Germans, they commenced the jihad. The Germans and the Turks wanted to rile up the Islamic world against the British, against the Russians. And what's happening today? The Germans and the Turks are using the Islamic world for their own power. The Germans wanted Muslims in Europe. The Germans wanted all of these hundreds of thousands of refugees in Europe. And what did it do? It helped empower Germany. Because the refugee crisis is what stoked up all of those sentiments in favor for Brexit against the British. It got the British out of the EU because the British were the biggest, and I've said this a million times and I'll continue saying this, the British were the biggest obstacle to German empowerment over the EU, over Europe. And in order for the Germans to pursue what they really wanted to do, and that really is to bring Germany up as a global power. The Germans needed the British out of the EU. And Germany and Turkey got those refugees into Europe. They were using the Islamic world. And the refugees entered Europe, and they scared the British out of the EU. Now, it's not exactly the same as what happened in World War I, but still, in both of these events, we have Turkey and Germany using the Islamic world for their benefit. The British are no longer in the EU. The Germans can now say, we can't trust the British because they left us, they abandoned us. Now let us create our pan-European military force led by Berlin, led by us. And Turkey could then make a unification or make an alliance with this superstate led by Germany. And you have a Germanic Turco powerhouse right there. So, very fascinating looking at history and seeing how it parallels with what is taking place today.